Hello, here I'm talking about the key fundamental patterns of axial control. These are important movement and posture patterns that give your spine the healthy foundation it needs. Support for the spine and shoulder and hip girdles so that you can move your torso and limbs freely and safely and efficiently. They develop naturally in infancy as babies learn to roll, sit, crawl, stand and so on. But in people with spinal pain, it's clinically clear that these patterns are often weakened or missing from how they move day to day. Over time, that takes a toll on the spine and its health and pain follows. And this is often associated with other problems such as breathing and incontinence, and particularly underappreciated with seemingly unrelated peripheral pains and many so-called injuries. There are 4 groups of axial fundamental patterns. In each group there are 4 sub-patterns. The first is the axial fundamental pattern, the core pattern of central spinal support and control, and this underlies all the others. The second group are the pelvic fundamental patterns, 1 to 4, and these describe how your pelvis supports and initiates movement of your trunk and legs. The third group are the shoulder fundamental patterns, again 1 to 4, how your shoulder girdle supports and initiates movement of the trunk and arms. The last are the head fundamental patterns, which funnily enough are probably the first to develop, how your head and neck support and initiate movement of your upper spine. Patterns 1 to 2 in each group control forward and backward movement. The third patterns control side to side movement in each region, and the fourth control rotation or turning. The 3 directions your spine needs to move well in if it's to be healthy. Importantly, all of the fundamental patterns naturally train the deep muscles, which research has clearly shown are deficient in people with spinal problems. These groups are the foundation for rebuilding healthy spinal function, and they're the bedrock of the Key Moves Therapeutic exercise program. Every exercise in the Key Moves is a clinically reasoned, evidence-informed response to the movement problems we commonly see in the people with spinal pain. Importantly, when these patterns are poorly controlled, the spine is vulnerable when people engage in other generic, non-individualised exercise programs which focus a lot on strength and stretching, when going to the gym, for instance, and even at yoga and Pilates. When underprotected, the spine becomes the weak link in the movement chain and a potent source of various other pains and injuries, often diagnosed as hip bursitis and many tendinopathies. Yet unfortunately, this link isn't generally appreciated by many in the medical and therapeutic professions. How did this understanding develop? I developed the understanding over decades of clinical practice, first in learning how movement develops in infancy, and later as the spine became my central focus, noticing the movement patterns that go wrong in my patients and mapping them against the evidence. My first book, Back Pain, a Movement Problem, described how the spine functions in health and the chained movement patterns seen in people with back pain. It covered the axial or core and pelvic fundamental patterns, although not completely. 8 years on and a lot more clinical experience later, my second book, Freedom to Move, Movement Therapy for Spinal Pain and Injuries, laid out the 4 groups of the key fundamental patterns in full. After my first book, I began running the Key Moves Therapeutic exercise and movement classes, which gave me a wealth of real-world evidence and much insight into how these patterns work and what happens if they don't. At its busiest, the practice ran 40 Key Moves classes a week. My second book, Freedom to Move, contains step-by-step instructions of 60 of the Key Moves Therapeutic exercise repertoire, and over time, many will be shown on this site. So keep an eye for the postings as they come in. Thank you.